I have my girl, Carol, the BCBA here, and Carol and I we'll be hosting a Zoom on Tuesday, and that's April the 16th at 7:30. I'm sorry, 7 o'clock Central Standard Time. And we're going to be talking about men, breadcrumbing, and intermittent reinforcement. Now, Carol wanted to go and make this video today. And she wanted to do so because there is a phenomenon that we are seeing men talking about living in their soft guy era and talking about drizzle, which is an unoriginal take on sprinkle. They're just doing it, even though it does sound like something is leaking. So, I mean, I know that they're joking, but I honestly believe that they're just tired of the patriarchy as well. What were some of your thoughts? I know you just wanted to, you're just like, let's put it on video. So I'm throwing it to
Yeah.
you.
Yeah, and when I saw that video, you're correct. And as a BCBA and from behavioral analysis, yeah, you are correct. So, we talked about many times how patriarchy really in the end it's really not a good system set up for anybody.
Right,
Men, women, centuries of it just has caused harm.
right,
So the men saying this, and I put in air quotes, it's a joke from them, because I think in a lot of ways they are even tired of the system. But as we talked about in a previous recording with us recently, it's kind of punishing for them to be able to sit there and say, I'm exhausted about it too. And it minimizes in a patriarchal environment, it's it's it comes off as like you're weak.
right.
Instead of saying, yeah, I'm tired. This system is not working. There's only a very few people at the top that's getting any kind of benefits from this, and everybody else is suffering. And the reason why it's not working, because patriarchy in the end for a lot of people is what they call, it's punishing. It's a punishing it's punishing reinforcement. Okay, so within the topic of ABA, reinforcement and then you have punishment, they're neither positive or negative. It just really depends on how it's used.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so when we talk about like positive reinforcement, it in ABA, it's when you add something good to increase the likelihood of a behavior increasing. So an example like this is if you give a child a treat for doing their homework, they're more likely to do their homework in the future. Okay,
Okay.
because they associate with the world. So then on the other hand, you have negative reinforcement is when you remove something unpleasant to increase the likelihood of that behavior again. So for example, if you have an alarm clock and you turn it off
Mm-hmm.
and to get out of bed, you're more likely to get up on time in the future to get rid of that annoying sound, right?
Okay.
So then on the other hand, we have punishment procedures. So
Right.
there's positive and negative punishment. So positive punishment occurs when you add something unpleasant to decrease the likelihood of a behavior occurring again. So for example, if a child touches a hot stove and they get burned, they're less likely to in the future to touch that stove. Okay, because that's reminder.
Right.
Negative punishment is when you remove something to decrease the likelihood of that behavior happening again. So a good example of this is if a teenager breaks curfew, loses their phone privileges, they're less likely to break curfew again because they don't want to lose their phone. So those are what we call
Right.
positive and negative punishment and reinforcement procedures. So, from the perspective, I'm looking at this from the perspective as a BCBA from the man's point of view, with their quote, air quotes, jokes. It's really patriarchy in a lot of ways. It's punishing to them. Okay. So for them, it's like this is really oppressive. But then
Right.
on top of it, if I complain about it and I don't and if I complain about this and admit that really this is exhausting for everybody,
Right.
I'm going to get additionally punished. So you're right in the fact of what your observations are, is that to them, it's just not a good system for everybody. There are a few men that acknowledge this patriarchy is not fun. It
Right.
sucks, right? But for the most part, centuries of what we talked about before, operant learning, has really minimized their voices in that fact. So if they do, because look at how when you do see a man do step up and say, hey, you know what, I see the women's point. This is an exhausting system. It really needs to change. What happens to them? They get called a simp.
Same
They
data.
get called, yes, they get called a simp. They are called weak. They're, oh, you're not a strong man. And so what happens is, just like I talked about with punishing, it becomes a punishing procedure for them to speak up. Like, okay, well, I'm not going to do it anymore. I'm not really
Right.
going to, I'm just going to sit back and just kind of let it happen. And they're exhausted. You could tell they're exhausted. They're tired of it all.
But one thing that I see when they jump into my comments is that they really think that women have such a soft life simply
Right.
because we're not going to work. I have been home with my children pretty much since they were born, and there was a few months in 2018 when I went back to work part-time.
Hmm.
Girl, I was skipping to work. I was so happy to go to work. Like literally, I'm walking in like, oh my God, this is the best thing ever.
Yeah.
Because going to work is so much easier than the day-to-day of doing life, of child rearing, of cooking, and it's like they don't understand that they do have it much easier, but it's not easy for anybody because we're not sharing the load anyway.
Right. Right. And in a more early in human history, societies were a little more what they call I cannot pronounce it correctly, but it was more a little more balanced, right?
Egalitarian.
Right. Thank you. I was gonna say this. I'm like, I'm gonna mess up the word, but yes, it was a little more. It was a little more egalitarian. So when you had that, you shared more of the load with each other. So when you get into more, when patriarchy starts coming in and you get more power and control, then the workload, if going back and you seeing what human history, as within patriarchy things grew and people, you had this power system, power dynamic system in it, to where you had men that were leaders of all this stuff, and then occasionally you had a woman that followed within their system, became really powerful, and often she would use it to full advantage and become way more powerful than them.
Mhm.
um but then most of the time under that system, most men were struggling like the women were.
Right.
Right. So, and it's interesting that you sit there and for you, and it's not, I'm a mom too, and we love our kids, but yeah, it's exhausting. And it can be very, very, in some ways, very, it can be almost a punishing thing to be
Right.
a mom sometimes. And it's not, and like I say again, being a mom isn't necessarily a punishing thing. So you got to remember, in ABA, it reduces the less likely of a behavior occurring, right? So punishment in that doesn't necessarily bad or good.
Yeah.
And it's on the viewpoint of what's going on in your environment. So when you went to work, that was kind of that was more, it was more like reinforcement for you to go to work.
Uh,
It was negative, what we call negative reinforcement. So when you went to work, you being out of that situation of being around being a mom all day, that got you out of that. Because at that time, your mindset was just like, being a mom in some ways it's a punishing procedure for me, even though I love my kids. It's exhausting. I need a break.
right.
But then work showed up, then it was like it was a negative reinforcement thing where it took you out of that for a little while so you could be an adult, so you
Right.
could, so you can mindset. And it's no different than for the men in some ways, because they don't want to acknowledge that this system is really hard. It is not helping them also. So I look at the behavior of them online with this drizzle and all that stuff, and they, they want, I want soft life, but they really do in a lot of ways. And they think that with women recently, they really don't understand. We've had to work all this time, and we've had to work all this time, and you got to be at home, and we've had to do all this crap out in the outside the house, and it sucks. Why would you want that? Why would you want that? It's punishing for us. Why do you want to go into a punishing environment when we
They
can, when everything we, in their eyes,
they
everything we
don't they
do
don't
is
want this. They don't
no,
want this.
no, they don't. And it, go ahead. I'm sorry.
They think that they want this, but
Right,
they don't pay attention enough to our lives.
right.
Like, this is kind of off topic maybe, but like how when men jump into my comment section and they name themselves some female sounding name and give
Yeah,
themselves a female looking picture, but they talk just like men, they don't pay enough attention to us to be able to cosplay as us.
right.
Like literally, if I were single and I was in like and I wanted to pair up to make
Hmm.
my life easier, it
Hmm.
would be so much easier if I just got a sister wife, because we would take the load, because we already know, like, okay, if I bring in all of the groceries, my sister wife will cook them.
Right,
And we're going to
right,
share cleaning duties. We're going to clean as we
right,
go. That kind of thing. I don't even know if they in them to know what all that we do, because so much of what we do is just done. Like we just wake up,
right,
you know, trash on the floor, we pick it up, we just do all of these things and we don't make enough noise. And so they just think it's just so easy because of that.
right. Right. And go back to what I said before, and what the point you're being is, because in their eyes, the world, when they've had to go into it, has been very punishing for them. They really didn't want to be in, and there wasn't any other options for them to be. So to them, the woman being at home, they're like, you're in the safety. Home is a safe environment for me. So why would you want to leave that? It's reinforcing, it's positively reinforcing to be at home. So why would you want to go into something that I know is difficult every day? You really want that?
Right.
So they don't they don't see it from women's perspective, because remember, going back for our last discussion, when you are taught centuries and centuries and centuries that your voice as a man has the most power, when it really doesn't in the system that we had. Depending on who you are in that patriarchal system, your voice matters, right?
Right.
So if you are lowered and the lower end on that system, your voice is not going to be positively reinforced to speak out more. You're going to, and that's going to add to frustration. That is going to add to you thinking, I feel trapped. And if you come from an environment that didn't have a lot of healthy dynamics on how to functionally communicate to people, you're going to take it out around people around you that is closest to you. So a lot of what we are seeing with the behavior of men, or them really from a behavior analytic viewpoint, is them really, they're just like, they're confused. They're dealing with all these centuries of just constant operant learning, constant being taught that we're superior. But you know what? I don't feel superior in this system. And there's still people above me that I have to still serve and help them out. And still I still feel oppressed. And then then I'm responsible for someone else who doesn't have to go into that environment. So I feel resentful to her about having to go into an environment when the house is the safest place to be, because I'm doing that. So why aren't you giving me positive reinforcement for acknowledging that? Because if you notice that, if when they if you notice, even in the red pill and all of that stuff, the constant theme that comes from them is, I want to be positively reinforced for what I do for you. Even if I don't respect your opinion, I want that. I want you to positively reinforce me. And women now have gotten to the point where, like, wait a minute. No. Before, yeah, I was forced to do that, but you know what? No, I'm not going to give you positive reinforcement when you're the system that you are suffering under too, and you actually kind of talk about it little bits here and there. It's harmful to you too, and you want me to just go along with what you say. No, I'm not going to do that anymore. So how about, so the women after a while were like, hey, how about we just change the system together, because it's not working. And remember, we talked about that mindset and centuries of that dysfunctional learned or operant learning skills that they gathered under patriarchy. They basically are just like, no. And remember what I talked about, how hard it is. The longer a behavior goes on, a learned behavior goes on, and the more it's reinforced, right? The harder it is to change that behavior. So we're seeing a whole really generation of men just struggling with their whole identity. Like, they're like, what do I do? Because the world isn't the way the world is, and I don't think it's going to go back to that. But at the same time, I still have to exist in this punishing these punishing procedures on me that I've got to exist. So where am I? They're in limbo. They literally, men are starting to be in limbo, but instead of really listening and just saying, hey, we need to make things more egalitarian
Right.
again.
So now, yeah, that they're having issues because they've always used us
Yes.
as a comparison to define who they are.
Right.
And they can't define themselves by themselves. So they're
Right.
having a hard time. But you said before we were talking that this connects to the, what did you say, the intermittent reinforcement.
Yeah, it
So
does.
how does all of this bring this back to what we're going to be doing on Tuesday?
So how this connects to intermittent reinforcement, it all goes into that breadcrumbing that we talk about, that a lot of men will do in a negative way in a relationship. So when you give out just a little bit of positive reinforcement, and when you have a history of seeing this man that you care about give you a lot of it all the time, and then all of a sudden backs off, then comes a little bit forward to give you, like, oh, here's a little bit of what we used to do, but I'm not going to do it anymore. Okay. So it helps to add into a way to try to use some way to manipulate and control the situation to keep you in that system, that oppressive patriarchal system that we all are suffering under. Yeah.
Right, right.
Yeah. So,
So we're definitely at that point, and I don't want to give it all away,
right.
but let's just give them a little nugget of what they're going to see. Remember, this is Tuesday. Is going to be a 90-minute presentation. Has PowerPoint situations. It's $30. This is actually a paid Zoom. So what all are they going to get from you?
What they're going to learn in that class is they're going to learn how to navigate around breadcrumbing, or AKA a negative way of handling intermittent reinforcement. So whether and I acknowledge that some women don't necessarily have a bad relationship with their boyfriend or their husband, but this is an annoying feature that they do in their relationship and they don't like it. So I'm going to acknowledge those group of women that really don't want to necessarily leave him. They just want him to fix the behavior. Okay, so they can stop, and I can teach them skills of how to address that in a more functional way. Then we also will address the women that see the patterns, don't know what to do, don't have never been taught of how to end that type of relationship, how to end the intermittent reinforcement that's unhealthy, that AKA breadcrumbing from it, and just step away. Because one thing about intermittent reinforcement, it's like, think about the equivalent I could put to it is how a slot machine is. We know how addictive gambling can be, right? It's the same thing in this. So being in a relationship that uses a lot of negative intermittent reinforcement is very, very addicting to the woman that cares about that man. But she's tired and she don't want to deal with it anymore. But every so often he still does really good stuff. And I remember how it was when he first started, because we got the love bombing type of stuff, right?
Yep.
Right. And the love bombing type of stuff is what we call continuous reinforcement. It's to get everything started, to say, oh, I'm doing a really good job. See me, this is how I am. So that's what we're going to be talking about, of how, ladies, how to navigate around negative intermittent reinforcement, or as you would call it, breadcrumbing.
Breadcrumbing.
Yep.
Bringing you along. Okay, well, with that, we are going to end this one here, and we're going to take it to Tuesday. And I'm not sure if on your end, if you save the Zooms or whatever, maybe we could just do a replay, or we'll get on the schedule if there is enough, if there's enough demand for another.
Yeah, what we can do is that a lot of times for clinicians, for doctors and nurses and BCBAs, and we have what we call like something for us to keep up our clinical hours and our skill. We have to take like what we call continuing education units, so CEUs. So if you're not able to come to the class, you have two options. You can, and I've seen this in the comments where there had been like at least 3 to 5 women saying, I would like to attend, but it's not fitting my schedule. So if you do pay toward it, we can give you a what they call an asynchronous, where you're not there present, but you can get a recording of it and you can get the PowerPoint. Now, or you have the option, if you need you want more one-on-one time to be able to be coached by me as a BCBA, I can book that time with you too. And I take different types of insurance, and depending on what state you are in, depending on the licensing. But that is 2 ways that can happen, because I have seen like at least 2 to 3 women talk about that. It's like, I would like to attend, but I can't do it that time. So that's an option, and I use that anyway, the asynchronous, for a lot of my CEUs, because I can't be present in the middle of a presentation by a peer of mine trying to educate me on the latest information on stuff, because I work, I have clients I have to see. So this is an option that we could do too. So yeah, so don't worry, ladies, if you're not able to attend, there are ways to get what you need.
All right, y'all. So we're going to go ahead and end this one. Jump in the comments. Let me know what you think about this conversation, how she is bringing all of these educational terms to such drizzle.
I just, I look at that and I'm like, okay. Okay. That's all I have to say to that is okay. I don't know what else more to say.
All right. Mommyhood is calling me. I gotta go. All right.
Okay.
All right.
Bye, ladies.